Or
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this short session for 30 minutes. Tim Baker's my name, and I look forward to just sharing with you my thoughts about the job description. I wrote a book several years ago called The End of the Job Description, and you could probably work out what my view is about the job description. I think there's some problems that we've got with it, and I think in the post-COVID environment, we're in a position where we can actually start to redress that. So let me lead you through the process and give you a bit of an idea as to what I'm thinking in terms of how you might actually document the work that people do and perhaps move away from the job description. So those of you who don't know me, I do lots of things. I write books, of course, and I am a platform speaker. I also am an executive coach, and I still play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brizzy. So a few interesting things, hopefully, about myself. And I think the big objection I would have in relation to the job description is this. You might be thinking, well, if we replace the job description, then what replaces it? So let me be clear about this. I still believe that people should have a work document to work from. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that we don't have something on paper recording what people should be doing in the workplace. But the problem I have is that I think the current way we do things is inadequate. So I'm going to suggest some other approaches that we can use for that, which I think will do a much better job. And I'm going to talk about that today. So I'm going to talk about the inadequacies of the job description. I'm just going to talk about really why it should be replaced so that, we can put that argument forward. Then I'm going to talk about the concept of non-job roles, which I think are really, really important and often underestimated when it comes to performance. And I've got a special offer for you at the end of this presentation. All right, so the first thing I'd say about this is, where did the job description start and how did it all come about? Well, Frederick Taylor, who was a management consultant, and I would suggest probably the most influential management consultant in history, was engaged by Henry Ford on his assembly line, Ford Motor Company. And his job was basically to try to improve efficiencies in terms of the assembly line for producing, in those days, the Model T Ford. He wrote a book, The Principles of Scientific Management, and it's interesting, if you Google that book and look at it on Amazon, it's still a bestseller, which is pretty extraordinary considering it was written in the early part of the 20th century. So it's still very popular, but of course, the concepts that he used, which are scientific management, I think are outdated now. And basically what he did is, I'm sure you've heard the story, but what he did is he did what they call time and motion studies. So he looked at each step along the assembly line, and he looked at what he called the one best way. So what he was looking at is a way of doing each part of the job on the assembly line more efficiently. In other words, doing it as quickly and as effectively as possible. So for example, if you're putting the tires on a car, how can you do that in the one best way, which is efficient? Now, prior to scientific management, it was pretty much a case that workers would just decide what the best way was in their own way, and everyone would have their own approach, of course, to doing these sorts of jobs. So what Frederick Taylor did is he pretty much put the scientific management approach in so that everyone was doing things in a certain prescriptive way. And of course, even now in the 21st century, we are still using scientific management. So if you look at, an organization, for example, like McDonald's Corporation, they very much subscribe to the views of scientific management. So, there's certain ways that things are done so that when somebody buys a franchise, they're buying a system. And so what they're doing is they're buying a series of ways that people can do things in a very, in the one best way. So scientific management has been very successful. And in fact, Frederick Taylor demonstrated this, and the profits for the Ford Motor Company went up significantly as a result of his scientific management principles. But I think the world's changed significantly since then. And because he could then document how things were done, then that documentation was a sort of early iteration of the job description. The problem, of course, with the job description is that we often have this legal disclaimer at the bottom of the job description. I'm sure you're aware of this, something along the lines of you are required to complete any other duty deemed relevant by your manager. So the whole idea is that basically, if you think about it, is quite farcical and lends itself to Dilbert-style jokes that if we can't capture everything on this work document we call a job description, we have to put a legal disclaimer at the bottom to make sure that basically anything's open to being done by that job holder. And that therein lies the issue with the job description. And of course, we all get frustrated with the job description, don't we? We often realize that very rarely do we find a job description that really does encapsulate what the job holder should be doing. And so people have been very frustrated with this for decades. And I think now that we're living in a world that's moving so quickly and rapidly and so unpredictably, what we might call a VUCA environment, we've got a situation where this job description really isn't the best way to record what a job holder should do. And you can see a copy of my book, The End of the Job Description, over in the bottom right-hand corner. But if you look at the management framework that I put together, this is how it should work, essentially. So any organisation should have a vision, or what they probably now call a purpose. And from that purpose or vision, we have a mission statement. And then from that mission statement, we have a set of core values. That is basically the values of the organisation. And then we have, what I would call, a role description or a job description. The job description, of course, should be consistent with the vision, the mission, and the core values. And in the job description itself, we have a series of key result areas. The key result areas are usually 6 to 8 key areas that people should be attending to, that are basically the responsibility of the job holder. And from there, if it's written well, there should be a series of key performance indicators, and that is how will one be assessed in terms of their effectiveness in doing that key result area. And from there, we have what we might call targets. That is, they can be qualitative or quantitative targets. So qualitative targets, of course, are based on numbers, and a qualitative target is based on a process. And essentially, that's how the framework should work. However, I think the problem that I've got is where we have the role description. Well, it should be a role description, a job description as such. So let's have a look at that a little bit further and understand that a little bit more in detail. So this is a provocative statement, but I think hopefully I can convince you that it's true. And the statement is that the roles that people play in organisations are more important than the jobs they do. Now, you might say, well, hang on a minute, there's a job description and that's really what people are reviewed on. How could the roles that they play be more important? Well, let me try and illustrate that for you. So if you consider this, that if you think about the work that people do in an organisation, basically there are two dimensions. Now, one dimension is the job role. So basically the job role encapsulated in the job description is really the technical aspect of what people do. So we're very familiar with that. But I would suggest to you that there's another dimension that's just as, if not more important than the job role. And we'll call these non-job roles. And for the last 25 years, academics have recognized that there are such things as non-job roles. And they have been debating for a quarter of a century as to what those non-job roles are. But they've never really come to a generic set of non-job roles that are critical to all occupations. And I decided in my book that I would I'd have a go at that. And I've identified 4 non-job roles that I think are critically important. Now, when I say non-job roles, what I mean is that these aren't necessarily embedded in the job description, but nevertheless, if they're not being done, then the person or the job holder's work is going to suffer. Let's have a look at what they are. These aren't necessarily in any order, by the way, but the first one I'd identify with is having a positive attitude and enthusiasm. Now, I'm sure you'd be aware of this in a broad sense, that if you've got a person who's got a negative attitude and shows lack of enthusiasm in the workplace, then it's not only that person that's suffering, but pretty much everybody else around them. So I'm not expecting that people will come to work bouncing off the walls with excitement. It's not necessarily what I'm talking about. But equally, I'm not expecting people to come to work whinging, whining, complaining, playing politics, pointing the finger of blame. And yet we see this behaviour time and time again in organisations. And how many job descriptions actually identify that? And if they do identify it, it's usually a bullet point at the end of the document. But you'd have to agree, I'm sure, with me that being positive, solution-focused, and the rest is critically important to people's success in the workplace. The second role that I think is important is that people are expected to be team players. They have to work in teams. They have to work with other people because they're dependent on them. And again, I find that there are people that often will say, well, I just come to work and do my job. And, as if to say, well, I'm not really interested in working in a team. But of course, if someone's not willing to cooperate and work in a team, it's going to have a serious impact on their ability to do the job, not only them, but also the others as well. So you'd have to say that people have a team role to play that's critically important. But again, it's often not identified on the job description. And because of that, then people probably think that it's not that important. And herein lies the problem. If it's not written on the job description and it's not teased out in detail, then it's quite possible the job holder will not think that that is very important in terms of how they do their work. The third role, non-job role, is a skill development role. We expect people, and we should expect people, to continually grow and develop. They should be upgrading their skill set. They should be upskilling. They should be learning and growing all the time. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a knowledge worker or whether we're talking about somebody who's working in a blue-collar environment. Now, it's not only for the organisation's benefit, it's also for the individual's benefit, because if somebody is not showing, not growing and developing, then they're going to be left behind because the world is moving so quickly. So we really do expect people to continually grow and develop. But once again, how often do you hear people say in the workplace, look, I'm too old for learning, I'm too old for training, send somebody else to the course, or people will make all these excuses, or people will often say, well, look, I'm used to doing things this way. I'm not really keen to learn how to do something in a different way. And this, of course, is very frustrating. Again, the skill development role is not really teased out in the work document we call a job description. So we expect people to continually grow and develop. And of course, the individual benefits as well, because if somebody is continually in a state of growth and development, then they're obviously in a position where they can further their career, and the opposite's true as well. So that has to be critically important to the success of anybody, regardless of what the industry is. And the final role that I think is critically important is the innovation and continuous improvement role. Now, whereas the skill development role is very much about the individual and how they can improve themselves in the work that they do, the innovation and continuous improvement role is really about how people can actually improve their working environment. So this is about people bringing their ideas to work and how things can be improved, how things can be changed for the better. And some employees often think that that happens to be the role of the supervisor or the manager. But I would argue that everybody has skin in the game in terms of coming up with better, faster, easier, safer ways of doing things. Now, if you doubt what I'm saying here, think about this for a moment. If you've got somebody in your workplace who's highly technically competent, so in other words, they've covered bases on the left-hand side, their job role, they can do that very well. But at the same time, they've got a terrible attitude. They're always complaining. They are not team players, they're individuals. They really haven't upgraded their skill set and not interested in doing so. And they're not interested in improving the efficiencies and effectiveness of the working environment that they're in. You'd have to say that that person is probably not an ideal employee. So I guess what I'm saying is that these things on the right-hand side are critically important, but yet the job description doesn't really capture them. It's only in the last few years that people have understood the value of these things in terms of documenting them in the work document. But normally when they do document them, they're usually bullet points at the end of the document. They don't, they're not teased out to the same degree as the key result areas are. So in other words, the implication is that they're not really all that important. The most important thing in terms of work is to conduct your key performance areas to meet the minimum standard of performance. So these other things get left off the list. Now, let me just demonstrate what I mean by this. John Warner did a survey of 9,000 managers across the globe. And he asked these people, what were the 10 most valued job attributes that you're looking for? But he asked people, what was the number one job attribute you're looking for? So it was a frequency survey. And then when all this data was collected, they worked out through a frequency what number one was on the list, number two, number three, and so on. Number one on the list is that what employers want most of all is they want enthusiastic people with a positive mental attitude, right? That was number one on the list. Let's just go through them quickly. The second thing on the list was good communication skills. Thirdly, they wanted self-motivation. They wanted people who were self-starters, who were able to show prudent initiative when it was required. They wanted people who are honest, or they do want people that are honest. They want people that liked working with other people. And you could assume that that's very much around being a team player. They want people who would stick at what they're doing and not give up at the first hurdle. They wanted people who had the ability to work in teams. They want people who have good organisational skills and the ability to work under pressure, in other words, being resilient. They want people who are willing to continually learn. And they want people who are dependent and dedicated to what they're doing. Now, I don't think that list would surprise you. It certainly didn't surprise me. And so this is what employers are saying that they want. Now, what's interesting about this list is if you cast your eyes down that list, is there's nothing on there that shows that's technical. All of those things on that list are non-job roles. So the assumption is that employers are thinking, well, we expect people to have the qualifications to do the job. We expect people to be able to master the tasks that are required. But really, given a choice, these are the things that we're really looking for when we're actually employing somebody to do a job. So I'm just highlighting to you how critically important non-job skills are in terms of not only recruitment, but also the performance of the job as well. So it's obvious that non-job roles are critically important to success. So what I'm suggesting here is that we move from job descriptions to role descriptions. Now, you might say that's just semantics, it's just a play on words. What do you mean? Well, let me just give you a sense of what I do mean. So if I had to define a job description, I'd say that it usually defines a set of specific tasks and responsibilities that are performed by a particular job holder. All right, so that's not a controversial definition. I'm sure you'd agree with that. So really, what is a role description? Well, this is what I describe as a role description. It defines the job role, which of course is the technical tasks, exactly what's in the job description. So that still goes in the document. And this is where it's an important distinction, and non-job roles that employees are expected to perform at work. So it's the non-job roles that are bolted on to the task roles, so that the document is covering both dimensions of performance, the job dimension and the non-job dimension. And I would then therefore say to you that people's work can be conceptualized as playing 5 roles. One role is the job role, which is already captured in the job description, but there are 4 other roles. There is a positive attitude and enthusiasm role, there's a team role, there's a skills development role, and there's an innovation and continuous improvement role. So assuming that your job description is reasonably accurate in terms of covering the specific tasks and responsibilities that people perform, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to actually then craft the document around a series of non-job roles as well. And I've selected 4. There's undoubtedly more than 4, but these 4, I'm sure you would agree, are critically important to anyone's success in any working environment anywhere, well, regardless of what the industry is. So let's have a look at these and just unpack these a little bit. And let me give you a sense of what they mean just very quickly. So positive attitude and enthusiasm, in my view, covers several dimensions. I think it covers 3 dimensions: being solution focused, being autonomous, that is making decisions without close supervision, and having a positive energy about them. Those are the subsets of the non-job role. Now, let's move on to the next one. So in the team role, I believe that there are several things. Yes, leadership's one of them. That is the ability to influence other people within the team. In other words, to speak up at the right time, in the right place. It also means accountability. That is to have to balance the accountability of the individual and accountability for the team. So people hold 2 accountabilities, 1 for their individual performance and 2 for the team's performance. And let's move on to the skill development role. There's basically 2 elements to that. There's the self-development, developing oneself, but there's also the technical development. That is, of course, developing the actual skill sets required to do the actual technical part of the job. So all I'm doing here is unpacking these. And in my book, The End of the Job Description, I actually go into great detail about these, so you can get it, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can actually go and basically copy those and just recast them for your own industry. And finally, the continuous improvement role is about problem solving and critical thinking, of course. You can imagine that that would be a critically important element of that role, non-job role. And the other side of it is customer responsiveness. That is the ability to understand and appreciate how a change in the workplace will actually improve the interface with the end user. So all of this has been done for you in the book, and it's just a matter of basically taking it and then bolting that on to the job description. The job description now becomes a role description. So it covers both job role and non-job role. And of course, you know, in innovation and continuous improvement, there are lots of different elements there that are critically important to people's success. So how do you create a role description? Just to finish up, I think there are a number of ways you can do this. One way is to use what we might call the dynamic duo method, whereas you basically might get a couple of people to get their heads together who do the same job and basically work out how do they look at these 4 non-job roles in relation to the work that they're doing. The second approach, of course, is if you've got a team of people that all do the same thing, then of course you can get that team together and work through that document with the team. Another approach, of course, is for you to get together with the one person that happens to be in that role and work together collaboratively to work out how those non-job roles can be best, tailored for that person's work. And of course, the final one, if there's an individual who's in a unique role, then you might get them to do it themselves. The point I'm trying to make here, as I'm sure you can see, is that you try to give the person doing the job as much opportunity as possible to have skin in the game, because by doing that, of course, they're going to be more convinced of what they decide. So there we are, folks. There's a couple of things to think about, but I can say for sure that if you move deliberately from job roles if you move from job descriptions to job roles or role descriptions, you're going to open up a whole new avenue of performance. And one of the reasons of those 4 things are being neglected is because they're not on the work document we call the job description. If you think about it, that's very true. So next week, and I know many of you are aware of this, but I have one of these running every week at 10 o'clock, same time. I'm going to talk about super teams. And super teams are the team of the future. And it's really about integrating artificial intelligence with human intelligence and working together in a collaborative environment. So I'm going to talk about that next week and how we need to be looking very much at that. And there's the link at the bottom, and you can just go straight in, of course. And that comes out of my book, The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential, which is just out in the marketplace right now. So my price is, or if you go on Amazon, you'll get the book for $39 plus postage. If you're interested in getting a copy of this book, today you can send me an email and I will send you a copy for $29. So which includes postage. So all you've got to do is send me an email. I will get your details and I'll send you the book and I'll sign it for you. And of course, I cover in great detail in this book this whole notion of shifting from a job focus to a performance focus, which of course is the way we need to go in the future. And hopefully I've convinced you of that. So that's pretty much it from me. Hopefully you've got something useful out of that. And by all means, if you've got any questions, send me an email. I'll be happy to answer those for you. So that's about it from me. So I'm just going to sign off at this stage and thank everybody very much for joining. So all the best. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. And hopefully we see you next week for looking at super teams. Thanks, everyone. All the best and goodbye.